me go back and rewind this video and take a look at what we see. And I'm going to stop it here as the airplane comes into the frame. The airplane looks to be kind of normal, but what we do know is this: the landing gear is still down. Now, this airplane is well beyond the point of rotation and climb out where they would have raised the gear. That's done at about 50 feet off the ground. And so more on that in a minute. What we also see is both engines, we don't know if they're producing thrust, but what we don't see out of the engines is any sort of flame, any sort of sparks. We don't see any indication that they're not operating normally. Now, to be specific with this was a loss of lift. It could have been caused by a power loss. So that's theory number one, is that they lost power on both engines. That caused the loss of lift. The airplane stopped flying. It started flying at one point. It was flying normally as the nose lifted off. Before they raised the gear, the airplane lost lift and stopped flying. So what would have caused that? Well, both engines failed. It was just one of two things. Either they ran through a flock of birds and basically destroyed both engines at once. The reason I don't think that's a likely theory is we don't see any birds in the picture. It would have had to be a lot of birds to follow out both engines. And we don't see any indications coming out of the back of the engine that happened. You'd see flames, you'd see sparks, you'd see something as those engines were kind of coming apart. It's smoke at a minimum, so you don't see any of that stuff. It looks as though the engines are intact and they're running. They could have both flamed out because of fuel contamination. That's the one thing that both engines would have in common, is the fuel. The problem with that theory, at least in my opinion, is that as they pushed up the power to go down the runway, they would have had the indications of a sputtering engine if the fuel had been contaminated. There's no indication that they did. They rolled down the runway, and I'll show you that video in a minute. They rotate at the normal speed. They take a nose-up attitude, which is really normal for that airplane at that speed. Everything else happens after that. So I don't think they lost power on the engines. Now, we could find out in a day or two. That's exactly what happened, and that's what caused the loss of lift. But that's theory number one. Here's what I think happened, and let's take a look now at this other video. I want to show you the closed caption video of the airplane on the takeoff roll. I'm going to run the whole thing. We're going to bring it back, and I'm going to show you in detail what I think happened. Right here, beyond that little shack that's in between us and the airplane, we see the airplane begin to lift up off of the runway. Everything up to this point looks completely normal. There's no fire or sparks or anything coming out of the engines. We can't tell from this distance whether those leading edge slats, those flaps in the front, are out or not. And we really can't tell whether those 5-degree flaps in the back are out. Let's assume for a minute they are. Because, why? Because the pilots would have had to overcome those flashing lights in their face and those deafening horns going off in the cockpit for some explained reason to keep on going. So they get to a normal rotate spot, they come up, and the airplane naturally comes up to about 2.5 degrees as the main mounts come up off the ground. That's when in the back of the airplane you feel like a slight nose up. And then at that point, the pilot, let me run this a little bit farther. See that 2.5 degrees right there? That's 2.5 degrees. They're off the ground. Right at this point, the pilot not flying, let's call him the co-pilot for a minute. The co-pilot is going to say to the pilot flying, positive rate. That means that the main mounts are off the ground and the airplane is climbing normally. Once the co-pilot says positive rate, the pilot then at the controls says gear up. At that point, the other pilot reaches up, raises the landing gear, and gets those great big drag devices now called the landing gear up into the airplane to make the airplane more aerodynamic, make it more slick. The flaps are still out. The airplane then rotates up to about 10 to 12.5 degrees up, and that's when in the back you feel it's like, wow, are we a rocket ship? We're going straight up. The airplane has plenty of lift over the wings, has plenty of thrust going on, and now those big landing gear, the drag devices now have been brought up into the airplane. Man, it takes off like a rocket. That part never happens. Right here, as we're looking at this airplane, the gear should be coming up into the airplane. It never does. Let me play it a little bit longer, and then I'm going to tell you why I think it didn't. Right there is the point where the pilot flying would normally bring the airplane up to about 12 degrees nose up. The gear should be almost completely up into the airplane. At this point, it hasn't budged an inch. You're going to see on the 787, the ends of the wings start to bend a little bit. They usually bend a lot more than this airplane. Why? Because as the airplane's picking up speed and it's picking up lift over those wings, those composite wings really bend. That is an indication, a visual indication, they're really getting a lot of lift. This 787 is not getting a lot of lift right now. But nothing's going on with the engines as far as I can see. Now, let me continue with this. At this point, watch the nose. It starts to go over right there. It starts to come back over. Why is it doing that? Here's what I think happened. And again, folks, this is just my opinion. This is a theory, one theory among many. Any of the others I could have shared with you up to this point could be absolutely right. But why do I think this one is more likely than the other two? Here's why. I think the pilot flying said to the co-pilot, gear up at the appropriate time. I think the co-pilot grabbed the flap handle and raised the flaps instead of the gear. If that happened, and this is a big if that happened, this explains a lot of why this airplane stopped flying, why the lift over the wings died. Because at that point now, the flaps are retracting, all that extra lift you're producing in the wings goes away. You're already slow, you already got the power pushed up all the way. This airplane is as heavy as it's ever going to be in this flight, and you still got those great big landing gear out there producing all sorts of drag. This is a bad combination at this point. You see the nose now start to come over. Now, why would the nose come over? Because the airplane is trying to create as much lift as it can over those wings. And if the flaps are coming up, it's going to nose over to get even more airflow over those wings. That's going to be a very, very uncomfortable feeling for the pilot at the controls. Why? Because he's losing airspeed and he's going to begin to lose altitude. Now, remember, he thinks the gear has come up. He might not know that the flaps came up. He just sees a motion over next to him, and he's looking outside going, wait, what's going on? It's all very confusing, and it all happens in a split second. Let's watch. The airplane starts to settle in. It starts to now descend. You see the pilot start to pull the nose up a little bit more, okay? As he's getting closer to the ground, he's probably got the power pushed up all he can, and now I think he's going to get into a power on stall. Not enough lift is being produced by those wings. All that drag is being produced by the landing gear that's still out there. Could anything have saved the day at this point? Maybe if they'd raised the gear. Maybe if they'd raise the gear and put the flaps back out, but it's very unlikely that once this gets to this point that they can recover from it. And now watch what happens. The airplane begins to kind of wallow, right? The pilot pulls back even more on the nose. That aggravates the whole thing, and now you get this waddle into the ground, and it's in a controlled power on stall until it impacts the ground.